All right, so I think we're ready to start. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar at env0. Today we'll be discussing risk, mostly in the context of infrastructure as code. We have Costa with us, a senior sales engineer on our team, and Yuval, who's our director of product. My name is Ronnie. I'm the director of engineering here at env0. And as I said, we're here to talk about the risk in the context of infrastructure as code. So let's start off. Let's kick it off with really what's interesting is that infrastructure as code in itself, in its own way, is a way to mitigate risks of traditional ClickUps and other ways of managing infrastructure. So, not knowing who changed what and when is a huge problem. And which infrastructure as code in itself is good in solving. Having an approval flow of pull requests and being able to create versions and roll them back as needed. All of that good stuff, it comes right out of the box simply by using any kind of infrastructure as code. Now, despite being this amazing step forward that it is, it does have loopholes that can be closed by simply leveraging some of the best practices and tools around it. And even without them, you're also risking at even introducing a few new risks simply by using infrastructure as code. So I suggest we'll just kick it off by reviewing some of those. Yuval, can you maybe share with us some examples of such risks?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ronnie. So, as you said, IC eventually presents a huge opportunity, right, for IT and DevOps teams. One of the things that we're talking about is that using IC, it's easy to really automate and control the flow of infrastructure provisioning, and even expose it to developers, testers, kind of in different automated flows. And while this is really a huge leap forward in automating and controlling what's happening with infrastructure, it does introduce few risks around it, and kind of to name a few, the first is around cost. And how do we make sure that cost is not exploding or being not under control, since eventually we're talking about users that are not necessarily infrastructure experts or in the weeds of, what are the best practices. And they may leave resources that are running over the weekend with no need in development environments. They may provision oversized resources that are not really needed. So what we usually see is that organizations are really looking for some way to put guardrails in place around this process. So this is kind of one use case that we really need to account for. Another use case or another risk is around access control. How do I make sure that people are not able to change, update, delete resources that are critical, for example, production environments and so on. A lot of customers have their own models. For example, in dev environment staging, I allow higher access, but in production, I would like to keep it more strict to the DevOps team and so on. So access control is a big deal. And again, when we're talking about IAC and opening to more people the access to infrastructure, this becomes an issue that needs to be taken care of. So those are kind of two main risks that come to mind.
Awesome. Great points. Thank you, Yuval. So, and speaking of some of these, we also hear the term policy as code gets thrown a lot to mitigate some of the complex cases you mentioned. Costa, can you maybe share some scenarios where using policy as code with, an enforcement platform that actually makes sure that they're aligned with the organization needs, combined with some data around cost or anything else, can kind of help minimize or reduce or eliminate the risks that Yuval mentioned?
Yes, certainly. So, as there is a saying, with great power comes great responsibility. That's where policy as code come into place. The most common scenario that I see our customers use is that they want to put a limit on deployment. Say you want to limit the deployment of a certain resource if the cost estimation is above $100. It's just an example. And if deployment is estimated to be more than $100, in that case, there will be needed an additional approval from either an admin or a combination of two reviewers that are going to look into the deployment, understand the business use case of why such an expensive deployment is needed, and approve accordingly. This way, you're putting a guardrail on your deployment so that not everyone can deploy just everything. And at the same time, you can have those limits for different environments. Say, in a testing environment, you can have lower limits compared to a production environment so that you know for sure nothing is being limited, but you have this guardrail to ensure no one just deploys whatever they want. Back at you, Ronnie.
Awesome. Thanks, Costa. So, I mean, that pops up a lot of great questions. Also, by the way, dear audience, if you have any kind of questions, feel free to just ask in the chat. They'll pop over here, and we'll kind of discuss them at the end of this webinar, and we'll have a broader discussion. So, I guess, Yuval, back to you. Let's maybe take a moment to review a few things. So basically, we know that infrastructure as code on its own does not guarantee organization benefit from all of it simply by using it. I think we've heard some examples right here. And I guess one of the bigger risks out there, and we see that all the time, especially with larger organization, that someone still somehow steps in certain cases, break through glass and so on, steps in and actually does something manual, or needs to make a manual change by actually going into a web console of your cloud provider and making such change, or using an API. That is what we call drift, as far as we know in infrastructure as the code. Yuval, maybe let's take a moment to kind of talk about this term and why is it so dreaded?
Yeah, sure. So drift is definitely dreaded term in the world of IC, and for a good reason. So just to put everyone on the same page, when we're drift is basically a scenario where the actual state of the infrastructure no longer matches the desired state. So we have our code as it's defined in IEC, but this kind of the state in the cloud is different. As Ronnie mentioned, it can be in a scenario that someone went and manually changed something in the cloud console, and then it's no longer in sync with the IEC. Another scenario that can happen is some external updates that happen outside of the code, integrations or external systems that are also making changes to resources without going through the code. So why is it really a big deal? A few things kind of to come to mind. The first one is about unpredictability. So one of the things that IEC allows us to have a single source of truth, right? A single place in our Git repo where we have all of the infrastructure definitions across clouds, across environments, across systems. And when we're planning changes, we're assuming that the code really reflects what happens in the cloud. And as soon as this assumption no longer stands, we'll run into issues, right? When we want to make a change, but basically applying this change may override something that someone did manually in the cloud or some other unexpected thing. So really unpredictability is one of the problems. Another thing is around compliance, right? IEC allows us to enforce policies. We talked about it in the previous previous point that we raised here. And one of the things is that sometimes those policies are enforced by the IEC, by the deployment pipeline, and having drifts and people that are going into the console may kind of go around those policies. And like the examples Costa mentioned, kind of provisioning expensive resources or other things. And one last thing that kind of is also important is the operational complexity that it introduces, right? As an engineer, I'll need to troubleshoot, investigate, try to understand what exactly happened here. So this is a big problem we see for many of our customers that are eventually looking for good tools to help them around this really kind of complicated problem.
Gotcha. Thanks, Yuval. That makes perfect sense. And I can also share from my own experience that, I mean, while always a strive to minimize drift among organizations. It always happens, and more than you know. And keeping tabs of how many times it happens is a struggle. And actually, when it does happen, one of the biggest challenges is really trying to understand how it happened, right? Who did it and why? Because in a sense of it, this is how we started, right? Unmanaged changes to begin with. There is no easy way to consume an audit trail of these changes. And Costa here, I think, is going to also show us exactly how to do that with env0's drift code a little later on. So stay tuned to see that in the demo. Now, let's kind of move on to another risk. So some of the biggest risks to an organization, especially enterprises and larger ones, is actually not knowing how healthy they are in terms of infrastructure as code coverage. Most organizations have been around long before infrastructure as code was a thing. And so, the cloud presence tends to be more manual and with more resources that have been around and unmanaged. And not knowing exactly how much coverage you actually have and say that you're making good progress can really affect how you're not leveraging from infrastructure as code as much as you would have wanted and complying as much as you would have wanted. And this is kind of often one of the biggest blind spots and poses a great risk on its own. So maybe for this last point, instead of actually having our vibrant discussion, I thought it'd be neat to actually see this in action, and also kind of wrap everything we talked about and get a view of that and how env0 helps mitigate exactly those risks. So Costa, maybe we'll go over to you with the demo.
Yes, great. So I'm going to share my screen and show you Cloud Compass. It's the feature that we have in env0. And basically what it does, it scans your cloud account and labels the resources within your cloud account based on how they were created. So here you would see that I can select which account I want to look into. I would see my dashboard where it will say when does the data start to come, as well as when it was updated and when the next scan is going to happen. I do see a graph that shows the resources trend, and I see this chart that tells me, hey, you have 75,000 resources, and 91% of them are resources that got deployed with your IAC. And this actually is a very good indicator. In my trends, I see that it stays around 91%, and that's a great example that shows that I follow the best practices of creating resources via IAC. At the same time, I do have about 8% of the resources that were created via Cloud API, meaning that someone connected remotely via terminal and created those resources. It's not great, but it's also not as organized as having it being managed by IAC. There are also some resources, about 143 of them, that were created manually. We call it ClickOps. And as you can see, every time I click on one of the labels, it filters out this table with the resources page. If I click on ClickOps, it will list me all those 143 resources, where I can clearly see what are those resources, how many operations occurred on those resources, meaning that if it's a Cloud API resource, I would see that there have been about over 5,000 operations on this S3 bucket, and we mark it internally as a high severity resource. We do have many severities: low, medium, and high, and we mark them based on how highly recommended is it that you make it an IAC resource, meaning that you will convert that manually created or resource created via Cloud API into your IAC. So that's exactly what Cloud Compass allows you to do. You can individually select the resource that you want to convert into the IAC, and you can perform an action by generating an IAC code for it. If I click that button and choose Terraform as my language of choice, it will generate me an import block. In Terraform, an import block actually is being used as a feature to migrate already deployed resources from the cloud over to your infrastructure as code. Basically, this page provides you the heavy lifting with the help of a Gen AI that we have under the hood. It provides you a two key and an ID key. Like I said, it's already a heavy lifting here to identify those keys. Once you have that, you can copy this into your code. You can run Terraform plan with a certain flag called generate config out. And after that, you will provide a Terraform file where you will want the actual resource block to be digested. So after you run that, you will have a newly generated file with the resource block. You will run an apply command, and the next time Cloud Compass runs its scan, you will be able to see that this S3 bucket is no longer managed by API. On the contrary, it will be managed by IAC. At the same time, when I hover over the resource that is problematic for me, I can drill down into it and go into the details where I can see all these operations that were already performed on that resource. I can see that when it was made, what event name, what operation, as well as which username performed that. This becomes very useful for me to understand when, who, and why disappeared. There is also a button to take me to the provider console if I want to see that operation in the actual AWS console. So that's Cloud Compass. And I will also point out that with Cloud Compass and being able to read the details of each of the resources, we can pretty much understand what caused the drift. And to demonstrate that, I have this S3 bucket that I deployed some times ago, and I know for a fact that it got drifted because under the drift tab, it shows me that I did have a certain tag that was env0 project ID, and then I see that the drift detection has triggered and resulted in a drifted result. I can see from the plan output that someone added this new tag that wasn't part of my code, and that's why it tries to remediate that. At the same time, there's another parameter, some other parameters. They used to be false, and now they're true. In env0, we have a drift cause capabilities where I can click this Analyze Drift Cause button, and it will take me to the same page of a drill down where I can see the historical events that caused this drift. I see that this bucket, it was created via IAC. I see the event name create bucket. It was sometime in December, and I can also see who created that. I see this was the username, and later on, as the time has passed, I see that there is a ClickOps operation that occurred on that bucket, and I see that put bucket tagging, and I see who actually performed that action. And this is someone that I can blame. And I can understand not only when, I can also see who did the change that caused the drift, and I can see and I can identify why it happened. So that's the drift cause and env0 capabilities, how to minimize the risk in that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Costa. Great demo. For everyone in the audience, we've sent a poll or a quiz for you on Zoom, so you're welcome to answer if you're able to. So kind of to wrap things up before we go into some of the Q&A from the audience and turn things over to you. So we've seen how managing risks in cloud provisioning starts with tackling drift and bringing resources under infrastructure as code management. And we've also touched on how env0 helps create secure, reliable, and cost-effective environments through features like policy enforcements for security compliance and cost control to prevent overruns. And while we didn't see everything we get to see on Costa's demo, we'd be happy to talk to you through to get the full picture if you're interested. For now, we'll just jump for a Q&A and see if you guys have any questions for us, for Yuval or Costa. We have one question that's already in from the audience. It says, if an organization already had experienced cost overrun, how does env0 assist in identifying and fixing those issues? Yuval, do you wanna maybe take a swing at that?
Yeah, sure. I can try. So that's a great question. And so we previously talked about how we enable policies in order to kind of prevent those kind of issues, but definitely it may happen, right? Either as a result of drift or not. And we have a few ways to approach it. One capability that we have is something that we call cost monitoring. So customers can basically integrate their tag their resources, and we are monitoring their costs. We are allowing to define notifications on those costs. So when an overrun happens, you can identify it pretty quickly. And the fact that you're managing your deployments in env0 can also help you to tie that to the specific deployment that may have caused this overrun. We also allow to kind of set the budget rules in that sense. So that's kind of another capability to be aware to what's happening and also set some budget limitations.
Awesome. Yeah. I can add in also that, again, kind of relating to what Costa mentioned before. When you run policies code in env0, part of the input is the current cost, the actual cost of the cloud resources under management, and env0 is able to know that, and also the budget that Yuval just mentioned. So we're actually able to prevent that as part of your organization policy and all via code. So I think with that, you really have full ground cover around cost and policy. With that, I think I don't see another questions popping up. Everyone, please take a moment to also fill out the form. Thanks. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Costa. Thank you, Yuval, for being a part of this, and thanks everyone for listening and joining in. Hopefully, you've got something interesting out of this conversation. We're happy to talk some more. Get in touch with us at env0.com, and have a pleasant, great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys. Take care. Bye.